March 3, 2009. Vinny Castellano controlled half of Hollywood's A-list careers. The producer who could make or break anyone with a single phone call. That's exactly why Marcus Reed chose him for the most dangerous audition in cinema history. 200 industry insiders packed the Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom that night. Marcus walked in, handed Vinny a script titled The Night Angels Die, and said 5 words that turned the room silent. "I know what you did." What happened in the next 40 to 8 hours became the most buried scandal in Hollywood history. 3 studios held emergency meetings because of it. And for 15 years, when people whispered about Vinny Castellano's fall from grace, they always came back to this night. The night Marcus Reed walked in with the truth. The night Vinny Castellano learned you can't bury the past when someone's been digging. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vinny's hand trembled as he gripped the script, the ballroom's crystal chandeliers casting harsh shadows across the title page. The Night Angels Die. The words seemed to pulse with malice, each letter a small knife twisting in his chest. Around him, Hollywood's elite continued their champagne conversations, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered his world. Marcus Reed stood 3 feet away, watching, waiting. The kid couldn't be more than 25, with the kind of lean hunger that marked every struggling actor in this city. But his eyes, those weren't the desperate, pleading eyes Vinny knew so well. They were patient, predatory. "Mr. Castellano?" Marcus's voice cut through the cocktail party noise. "Aren't you going to read it?" Vinny's throat felt like sandpaper. He flipped the script open, scanning the first page, then the second. His vision blurred as the words hit him like physical blows. Interior Malibu beach house. Night. The party is in full swing. Cocaine lines the glass coffee table like snow. Derek Castellano, 22, stumbles toward the bedroom, a syringe in his shaking hand. The script slipped from Vinny's fingers, pages scattering across the marble floor. Several nearby guests turned at the commotion, their faces shifting from mild curiosity to sharp interest when they recognized him. Vinny forced his expression into something resembling calm, but inside, his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged animal. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. Marcus smiled, bending to collect the scattered pages with theatrical precision. "I wrote it. Based on a true story, of course. The best scripts always are." "You don't know what you're talking about, kid." But even as Vinny said it, he could feel the lie cracking in his throat, because Marcus did know. Somehow, impossibly, this nobody actor knew about that night 15 years ago. The night Vinny had buried so deep he sometimes convinced himself it had been just another Hollywood nightmare. The night his son Derek had killed someone. "Don't I?" Marcus straightened, the script now neat in his hands. March 15, 1994. Your son's beach house in Malibu. A young actress named Sarah Chen. Ring any bells, Mr. Castellano? The name hit Vinny like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah Chen. Sweet, talented Sarah, who'd been so close to her breakthrough role, who'd trusted Derek when he'd invited her to that party, who'd ended up in the coroner's van by sunrise. "Overdose," Marcus continued, his voice conversational, almost friendly. "That's what the papers said. Tragic accident. Another young starlet who couldn't handle the Hollywood lifestyle. Except we both know it wasn't an accident, don't we?" Vinny's vision tunneled. The ballroom seemed to spin around him, 200 of the most powerful people in entertainment suddenly feeling like 2,000 eyes boring into his skull. He grabbed Marcus by the arm, his fingers digging into expensive suit fabric. "Not here," he hissed. "Not like this." "Then where?" Marcus didn't resist the grip. If anything, he seemed to welcome it. "Your office? Tomorrow morning? I'm thinking we should discuss the film rights. I've written the perfect starring role for you, Mr. Castellano, the producer who sold his soul to save his son. You're making a mistake, Reed. A very big mistake." Vinny's voice dropped to the register that had once made studio executives wet themselves with fear. "You have no idea who you're fucking with." But Marcus just laughed, a sound that cut through Vinny's threats like they were tissue paper. "Oh, but I do. That's the beautiful thing about this story, Vinny. I know exactly who you are. I know what you did that night. I know how you made the problem disappear. I know about the money you paid to keep mouths shut. I know about the actor you destroyed to protect your precious reputation." The room tilted. "What actor?" "Thomas Reed." Marcus's smile never wavered, but something cold and terrible flickered behind his eyes. "My father. The man you framed for Sarah Chen's murder. The man whose career you obliterated with a single phone call. The man who drank himself to death in a Phoenix motel room because no one would ever believe his word, against the great Vincent Castellanos." The world stopped. Vinny stared into Marcus Reed's face and saw it now, the ghost of features he'd tried to forget. Thomas Reed's eyes. Thomas Reed's stubborn jaw. Thomas Reed's unbreakable conviction that the truth mattered more than survival. "Impossible," Vinny breathed. "Thomas Reed didn't have a son." "He did." Marcus tucked the script under his arm like a weapon. "And that son has been waiting 15 years for this conversation. So here's how this is going to work, Vinny. You're going to produce my film. You're going to help me tell the real story of what happened that night. And maybe, just maybe, we'll finally give the devil his due." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Vinny's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his mind reeling through the impossibility of it all. Thomas Reed's son, here, now, after 15 years of carefully constructed lies and buried secrets. "You're insane," Vinny finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. But even as he said it, he could see the resemblance more clearly now. The way Marcus held his shoulders, that particular tilt of his head when he listened. Thomas had done that too, back when they'd worked together on Night Falls, back when Vinny had actually respected the bastard's integrity. Marcus checked his watch, a cheap Timex that looked out of place with his expensive suit. "I'm staying at the Roosevelt, room 512. You have 48 hours to decide whether you want to do this the easy way or the hard way." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the glittering crowd around them. "Though I have a feeling you'll choose easy. You always do." Without another word, Marcus turned and melted into the crowd, leaving Vinny standing alone among the scattered pages of his past. He knelt awkwardly, his knees protesting, and gathered the script with shaking hands. The paper felt toxic, radioactive. Each page he touched sent fresh waves of nausea through his chest. Fade in. Exterior Malibu beach house. Dawn. Police cars line the driveway. A coroner's van waits like a hungry vulture. Vinny snapped the script shut and stumbled toward the exit, ignoring the curious stares and half-heard whispers that followed in his wake. The valet brought his battered Honda Civic, a far cry from the Mercedes he'd driven 15 years ago, and Vinny drove through the winding Hollywood hills in a daze, the script burning like a coal in the passenger seat. His apartment was a studio in Los Feliz, the kind of place he would have sneered at during his golden years. One room, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that never got hot enough. But it was clean, and it was quiet, and most importantly, it held the only thing in this world that still mattered to him. "Papa the Fifth!" The voice hit him the moment he opened the door, and despite everything, despite Marcus Reed and the script and the avalanche of dread crushing his chest, Vinny smiled. Elena launched herself into his arms, all knobby knees and fierce hugs. 10 years old, with his ex-wife's dark hair and eyes that still looked at him like he hung the moon. She was supposed to be in bed hours ago. "Mama said you were at a fancy party," she said, pulling back to examine his rumpled tuxedo. "Did you meet any movie stars? Did you get their autographs?" "Elena Sofia Castellano," came a tired voice from the kitchen. "What did I tell you about staying up past bedtime?" Maria emerged, wiping her hands on a dish towel. At 42, she was still beautiful, though the years of struggle had carved worry lines around her eyes. They'd divorced 8 years ago, but somehow she'd never fully left his orbit. These days, she worked 2 jobs, secretary at a law firm during the day, waitressing nights at a diner in Glendale, just to keep Elena in decent schools and clean clothes. "Sorry," Maria said, shooting Vinny an apologetic look. "I tried to get her down an hour ago, but she insisted on waiting for you." "It's okay." Vinny set Elena down but kept his hand on her shoulder, grounding himself in her warmth. "Did you finish your book report?" "Of course I did." Elena rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair of someone who'd inherited at least some theatrical genes. "It's on Charlotte's web. Want to hear it? Tomorrow, sweetheart. Papa V's had a long night." Elena studied his face with the uncomfortable perceptiveness of children. "Are you okay? You look sad." Vinny forced another smile, ruffling her hair. "Just tired. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." But as Maria tucked Elena into the pull-out couch that served as her bed during weekend visits, Vinny stared at the script on his kitchen counter and knew that sleep would be impossible. Marcus Reed's words echoed in his mind, "You're going to produce my film." The kid didn't understand. Vinny couldn't produce anything anymore. His company, Castellano Pictures, existed only on paper now. A cramped office above a pawn shop, a secretary he could only afford 3 days a week, and a reputation so thoroughly destroyed that he couldn't get a meeting with a film student, let alone real money. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was Elena, sleeping peacefully 10 feet away, still believing her Papa V was someone worth admiring. If Marcus Reed's story came out, if the truth about that night surfaced after all these years, she would learn exactly what kind of monster had been tucking her in at bedtime. Vinny poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and sat at his kitchen table, the script unopened before him. Outside his window, Los Angeles sprawled in all directions, a galaxy of lights that had once felt like his personal kingdom. Now it felt like a prison. And Marcus Reed held the only key. Vinny drained the whiskey in one burning gulp and opened the script. The pages felt thin between his fingers, but the words were dense with detail that made his skin crawl. Marcus had done his homework. Every conversation, every timeline, every sordid detail of that March night was laid out with surgical precision. The cocaine, the girls Derek had invited, the way the music had pounded through the Malibu house until the neighbors finally called it in. And Sarah Chen. Beautiful, trusting Sarah, who'd believed Derek when he'd promised to introduce her to casting directors at the party. Who'd been so grateful for the opportunity that she'd ignored every red flag. Sarah looks uncomfortable as Derek leads her toward the bedroom. The party rages around them, but something in his eyes has changed, something hungry and desperate. Vinny's hands shook as he turned the page. He remembered getting the call at 2 a.m, Derek sobbing and incoherent, babbling about accidents and needles and how it wasn't his fault. By the time Vinny had reached the beach house, Sarah was already cold on the bedroom floor, and Derek was curled in the corner like a broken child. "She wanted it," Derek had whispered. "The heroin. She asked for it, Dad. I gave her too much." But that wasn't the whole truth, and they both knew it. Derek hadn't just given Sarah the heroin. He'd held her down while he injected it, too strung out and desperate to understand her protests. Not rape exactly, but close enough to destroy both their lives if it ever came to light. So Vinny had done what powerful men do. He'd made it disappear. The script captured it all in brutal detail, the frantic phone calls to fixers and cleaners, the evidence that was moved or destroyed, the witnesses who were paid to forget what they'd seen. And then, the masterstroke that had haunted Vinny for 15 years, the decision to pin it all on someone else. Vinny stares at Thomas Reed's headshot on his desk. A good actor, an honest man, the perfect fall guy. Vinny slammed the script shut, but the memories kept pouring out like blood from a severed artery. Thomas Reed had been working on Night Falls at the time, one of Vinny's bigger productions, a character actor with real talent but no connections, no power, no family to protect him. When Vinny had planted evidence linking Thomas to Sarah's death, a few carefully placed phone records, some doctored security footage, the man had been too shocked to mount an effective defense. The industry had blacklisted Thomas overnight. No agent would return his calls. No director would meet with him. Within 6 months, he'd lost his apartment, his car, everything. He'd disappeared into the wasteland of failed actors, and Vinny had convinced himself that was the end of it. But now Thomas Reed's son sat in a hotel room across town, holding 15 years' worth of rage in his perfectly manicured hands. Vinny's phone buzzed on the counter, jolting him back to the present. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something, instinct maybe, or masochistic curiosity, made him pick up. "Hello, Vinny?" The voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it, something that made Vinny's blood freeze in his veins. Not Marcus Reed's voice, Someone older, more patient. Who is this? Someone who's been waiting a very long time to talk to you. A pause. I know about the script, Vinny. I know about Marcus. And I know what you're thinking right now, that maybe you can make this go away like you made Sarah go away. Like you made Thomas go away. Vinny gripped the phone tighter. What do you want? The same thing Marcus wants. The truth. But unlike that boy, I'm not interested in your redemption. I'm interested in justice. Listen, whoever you are, do you know what really happened to Thomas Reed, Vinny, after you destroyed him? The question hung in the air like smoke. Vinny had heard rumors over the years that Thomas had ended up in Phoenix working construction, that he'd started drinking, that he'd never gotten over the betrayal. But Vinny had never looked deeper. He hadn't wanted to know. He spent 2 years trying to prove his innocence, the voice continued. 2 years investigating Sarah Chen's death while living in his car and eating from dumpsters. Do you know what he found? Vinny's throat felt like it was closing. No. Evidence, Vinny. Real evidence. About what your son really did that night. About who else was involved. About secrets that make your little cover-up look like child's play. The voice dropped to a whisper. Thomas Reed died with those secrets, but he didn't die alone. He had a son, you see, a son who inherited his father's files and his father's patience and his father's unshakable belief that the truth always surfaces eventually. The line went dead. Vinny stared at the phone in his trembling hands and realized that Marcus Reed wasn't his only problem. Someone else was watching, someone who knew even more than the script revealed. His old life, what was left of it, was officially over. Vinny sat frozen at his kitchen table, the dead phone still pressed to his ear. The silence in his apartment felt suffocating, broken only by Elena's soft breathing from the pull-out couch and the distant hum of traffic on Los Feliz Boulevard. Someone else knew. Someone who'd been watching, waiting, planning alongside Marcus Reed. His first instinct was to run, grab Elena and Maria, empty his bank account, and disappear into the vast anonymous sprawl of America. But the rational part of his brain, the part that had once navigated studio politics with ruthless precision, knew it was already too late for that. Marcus had found him. The voice on the phone had found him. After 15 years of careful invisibility, his past had finally caught up. Vinny poured another whiskey, then thought better of it and dumped it down the sink. He needed clarity now, not the false courage that came from a bottle. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, looking for anyone who might still owe him a favor. The list was depressingly short. Danny Rossetti answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. Jesus Christ, Vinny, do you know what time it is? I need a favor, Danny. You need a lot of things. That doesn't mean I'm going to give them to you. But Danny didn't hang up, which meant there was still a sliver of their old friendship left. They'd come up together in the 80s. 2 hungry kids from Brooklyn who'd clawed their way to the top of Hollywood's food chain. Danny had survived his own scandals and still ran a mid-tier talent agency in Beverly Hills. Someone's trying to destroy me, Vinny said. I need to know who I'm dealing with. A long pause. What kind of someone? A kid named Marcus Reed. Claims to be Thomas Reed's son. The silence that followed was so complete, Vinny thought the call had dropped. When Danny finally spoke, his voice had changed. Colder, more distant. Thomas Reed. Christ, Vinny. I haven't heard that name in years. You remember him? Of course I remember him. Good actor. Honest. Got caught up in that overdose business with the Chen girl. Another pause. Word was you had something to do with that. Vinny's chest tightened. What word? Nothing concrete. Just whispers. You know how this town talks. Danny's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Tell me you didn't fuck over an innocent man, Vinny. Tell me that much. The desperation in Danny's voice told Vinny everything he needed to know. Even his oldest friend suspected the truth. How many others had connected the dots over the years? How many had kept quiet out of fear or indifference? I need to find out everything I can about Marcus Reed, Vinny said, avoiding the question. Background, financials, who's backing him? Can you do that? I can make some calls. But Danny sounded reluctant now, like a man being asked to step into quicksand. Vinny, if this kid has real dirt on you, maybe you should think about... About what? Confessing? Destroying what's left of my life? Vinny glanced toward Elena's sleeping form. I've got people to protect, Danny. You had people to protect 15 years ago, too. How'd that work out? The line went dead, leaving Vinny staring at his phone. Even Danny, loyal, amoral Danny who'd covered up affairs and drug habits for half of Hollywood, was distancing himself. The walls were closing in faster than Vinny had imagined possible. He spent the next hour pacing his tiny apartment, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe he could discredit Marcus somehow, paint him as an unstable wannabe actor seeking revenge against the industry that had failed his father. But the script was too detailed, too accurate. Anyone who read it would recognize the truth. Maybe he could offer Marcus money. Not that Vinny had much left, but desperate men found ways to liquidate assets. Except Marcus didn't seem motivated by money. The expensive suit, the confident way he'd moved through the party. This wasn't about financial desperation. This was personal. At 3 a.m., Vinny's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, room 512. Roosevelt Hotel. Come alone. M. Vinny stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the delete button. He could ignore it, pretend this was all some elaborate nightmare. But the voice on the phone had been clear. Marcus wasn't working alone. Whatever evidence they had, whatever plan they'd constructed, ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. He looked at Elena one more time, her face peaceful in the dim light filtering through his windows. In a few hours she'd wake up expecting breakfast and stories about his glamorous night among the movie stars. Instead, he'd have to figure out how to explain why Papa the Fifth might not be around much longer. Vinny grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. The Roosevelt Hotel was 20 minutes away in morning traffic. Time enough to prepare for whatever Marcus Reed had planned for Act 2 of his revenge story. The Roosevelt Hotel loomed against the pre-dawn sky like a monument to Hollywood's golden age, its neon sign casting sickly pink light across the empty sidewalk. Vinny sat in his Honda for 10 minutes, watching the entrance, half expecting Marcus Reed to emerge with a team of FBI agents or investigative journalists. But the street remained quiet except for a homeless man pushing a shopping cart full of aluminum cans. Room 512 was on the 5th floor, down a hallway lined with black and white photographs of dead movie stars. Vinny knocked twice and waited, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. The door opened to reveal Marcus Reed in a white hotel bathrobe, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked younger without the expensive suit, maybe 30, with his father's sharp cheekbones and something harder in his eyes that Thomas had never possessed. "You came," Marcus said, stepping aside to let him enter. "I wasn't sure you would. Cut the shit, kid. What do you want?" The hotel room was standard corporate luxury. King bed, mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Hollywood Boulevard. But what caught Vinny's attention was the wall opposite the bed, which Marcus had converted into some kind of war room. Photographs, newspaper clippings, police reports, and timeline charts covered every inch of available space, connected by red string like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. And at the center of it all was a photograph Vinny hadn't seen in 15 years, Sarah Chen, smiling at the camera with the kind of radiant hope that belonged to young people who still believed the world was fair. "Jesus Christ," Vinny whispered, moving closer to the wall. "How long have you been working on this?" "Since I was 18. Since I found my father hanging in his garage in Phoenix." Marcus moved to the desk and poured coffee from a silver service that must have cost more than Vinny made in a month. "He left me everything, you see. Every file, every photograph, every piece of evidence he'd collected trying to prove his innocence." Vinny studied the timeline more closely, and his blood began to freeze. Sarah Chen's death was just one point on a much larger map, connected to other deaths, other cover-ups, other young women who'd disappeared into Hollywood's machinery of exploitation. Names he recognized from old police reports and gossip columns. Faces that had haunted his nightmares for years. "This is insane," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The connections were too clear, too methodical. Someone had been very busy for a very long time. "My father spent his last 2 years investigating Sarah's death," Marcus said, settling into the desk chair like a prosecutor preparing for closing arguments. "He started with the obvious questions. Who had access to the house? Who knew Sarah would be there? Who had motive to kill her? But the deeper he dug, the more he realized Sarah wasn't the real target. What the hell does that mean? Marcus stood and moved to a section of the wall covered with financial documents, bank records, wire transfers, shell company filings. Sarah Chen was investigating a story when she died. A story about young actresses who'd gone missing over the previous 5 years. Girls who'd come to Hollywood with dreams and ended up in unmarked graves or at the bottom of Mulholland Canyon. Vinny's legs felt weak. He'd known Sarah was a journalist. That had been part of the problem. But he'd assumed she was just another wannabe entertainment reporter looking for celebrity gossip. The idea that she'd been pursuing something bigger, something dangerous, had never occurred to him. Sarah had sources, Marcus continued, his voice gaining momentum. People inside the industry who were feeding her information about a network of producers, agents, and financiers who were trafficking girls, using the promise of stardom to lure them in. Then, he gestured vaguely at the wall of photographs. Well, you can see how those stories ended. And you think Derek was part of this? I think Derek was a useful idiot. A rich boy with daddy issues and a drug habit who got in over his head. Marcus turned to face Vinny directly, and there was something in his expression that made Vinny want to run. But I know you knew, Vinny. I know you've always known exactly who killed Sarah Chen and why. The hotel room felt like it was shrinking around them. Vinny stared at the wall of evidence, 15 years of meticulous investigation laid out like an indictment, and realized that everything he'd believed about that night was wrong. Sarah Chen hadn't been a random victim. She'd been murdered to silence her, and Derek had been set up to take the fall just as surely as Thomas Reed had been, which meant the real killer was still out there, still protected by Vinny's silence, still hunting. Who else knows about this? Vinny asked. Marcus smiled, and it was the coldest expression Vinny had ever seen. Everyone who needs to know. The question is, are you finally ready to tell the truth about what you saw that night? Or do we have to do this the hard way? Outside the window, Los Angeles was beginning to wake up, unaware that its darkest secrets were about to surface. Vinny stared at the wall of evidence, his mind reeling as 15 years of carefully constructed lies began to crumble. Sarah Chen hadn't died because Derek was a spoiled addict with poor impulse control. She'd died because she'd gotten too close to something much bigger, much more dangerous than anything Vinny had imagined. You want to know what I saw that night? Vinny's voice came out as barely a whisper. I'll tell you what I saw. I saw my son sobbing over a dead girl, covered in her blood, needle still in his hand. I saw... No, Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through Vinny's words like a blade. You saw what someone wanted you to see. You saw a crime scene that had been staged, Vinny. You saw your son being framed. The words hit Vinny like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his legs finding the edge of the hotel bed. That's impossible. Derek called me. He was there when I arrived. Derek was unconscious when you arrived. Marcus moved to another section of the wall, pulling down a police report that had been heavily redacted. Rohypnol in his system. Enough to keep him compliant, but not enough to kill him. Someone drugged your son, positioned him at the crime scene, and waited for you to do exactly what you did, protect him by covering it up. Vinny's hands were shaking now, the tremor spreading up his arms to his shoulders. He remembered Derek's condition that night, the way his son had stared at him with glassy, unfocused eyes, the slurred speech he'd attributed to shock and drugs. But Marcus was right. Derek hadn't been high. He'd been sedated. The phone call, Vinny said slowly, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Derek called me at 2 a.m., but the coroner estimated Sarah died around midnight. Someone else made that call, Marcus confirmed. Someone who needed you to arrive at exactly the right time, after they'd finished staging the scene but before the body was discovered by anyone else. Someone who knew you'd react emotionally instead of logically. Someone who was counting on your love for your son to make you an accomplice. Vinny thought about that night, really thought about it for the first time in 15 years. Derek's confused state, the way the evidence had been almost too convenient, too obvious, the fact that no one else at the party seemed to remember seeing Derek with Sarah, despite the supposed witnesses who later came forward. Who? The word came out as a croak. Who did this? Marcus pulled down a photograph from the center of the wall, a glossy headshot of a man in his 50s with silver hair and predatory eyes. Vinny recognized him immediately, and his blood turned to ice. "Robert Ashford," Marcus said. "Your old partner, your mentor, the man who taught you everything about how this industry really works." Vinny's world tilted on its axis. Robert Ashford, Bobby to his friends, had been more than a business partner. He'd been Vinny's closest confidant, the man who'd pulled him up from assistant to producer, who'd stood by his side through every triumph and scandal, who'd helped him make Sarah Chen's death disappear. "Bobby's the one who suggested framing my father," Marcus continued remorselessly. "Bobby's the one who had connections with the fixers and the cleaners. Bobby's the one who knew exactly how to plant evidence that would destroy an innocent man's life." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And Bobby's the one who's been running a trafficking network for the past 20 years, using his position and influence to prey on young women who came to Hollywood looking for their dreams." Vinny remembered Bobby's reaction when he'd called him that night, panicked and desperate. How quickly Bobby had arrived at the beach house. How efficiently he'd taken control of the situation, directing the cleanup with the calm professionalism of someone who'd done it before. How he'd suggested Thomas Reed's name almost casually, as if the idea had just occurred to him. "You protected a monster," Marcus said, and his voice carried 15 years of accumulated rage. "For 15 years, while my father drank himself to death and Bobby Ashford continued killing girls, you stayed silent. You let yourself believe Derek was guilty because it was easier than facing the truth, that you'd been played by someone you trusted." The revelation hit Vinny like a physical assault. Every memory from that night looked different now, viewed through the lens of Bobby's manipulation. The man he'd considered his closest friend had orchestrated everything: Sarah's murder, Derek's framing, Thomas Reed's destruction. And Vinny had been the perfect unwitting accomplice, so desperate to protect his son that he'd never questioned the convenient narrative Bobby had provided. "Derek was supposed to die that night too," Marcus added quietly. "The overdose was meant to be fatal, but your son had built up more tolerance than Bobby anticipated. So Bobby improvised, turned Derek into the perfect patsy and you into the perfect co-conspirator." Vinny buried his face in his hands, finally understanding the full scope of his betrayal. Not just of Thomas Reed, but of his own son, who'd spent 15 years believing he was a killer. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the distant hum of Los Angeles traffic 5 floors below. Vinny's hands remained pressed against his face, but he could feel Marcus watching him, waiting for some acknowledgement of the truth that now hung in the air like poison gas. "Where is Derek now?" Marcus asked finally. Vinny looked up, surprised by the gentleness in the younger man's voice. "Rehab facility outside San Francisco. His 4th time. The admission tasted like ash. He calls me sometimes when he's having bad days. Tells me he can still feel her blood on his hands. Still sees her face when he closes his eyes. And you never told him the truth." "How could I?" Vinny's voice cracked. "How do you tell your son that his entire life has been destroyed by a lie? That he's been carrying guilt for something he never did?" Marcus moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the brightening sky. "You could start by admitting it to yourself. You could stop protecting the man who destroyed both our families." Vinny studied the wall of evidence again, seeing it with new eyes. Sarah Chen's investigation had been thorough. Marcus had inherited not just his father's files, but Sarah's as well. Bank records showing suspicious payments to shell companies. Flight manifests with Robert Ashford's name appearing repeatedly on routes to Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. Photographs of young women who'd been promised parts in Bobby's films and were never seen again. "How many?" Vinny whispered. "We've documented 17 deaths over 20 years, but Sarah believed there were more." Marcus turned back to him. "Bobby Ashford has been operating with impunity because men like you chose silence over justice. Because every time someone got close to the truth, he found a way to redirect the blame." Vinny's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Beautiful morning, isn't it? Hope you're enjoying your reunion." Rah! The blood drained from Vinny's face. "He knows I'm here." Marcus wasn't surprised. Bobby's been monitoring both of us for months. He has resources, connections, people who owe him favors throughout the industry. He paused. People who are just as complicit as you've been. Another buzz. This time it was a photograph. Elena walking to school, her pink backpack bright against the morning shadows. The message below was simple. Such a sweet girl. Be ashamed if something happened to her. Vinny shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. That son of a bitch. I need to get to Elena. No. Marcus's voice was sharp enough to stop him. That's exactly what he wants. He's trying to make you panic, make you do something stupid. He pulled out his own phone. Elena's safe. I have people watching her. What people? Who the hell are you really? For the first time since Vinny had met him, Marcus looked uncertain. I'm exactly who I said I am, Thomas Reed's son. But I'm not working alone. He gestured toward the evidence wall. This kind of investigation requires resources I don't have, connections I couldn't make on my own. FBI? Justice Department. Organized Crime Task Force. Marcus's confession came out reluctantly. They've been building a case against Ashford's network for 3 years. I'm their inside man. The revelation should have been a relief, but Vinny felt only a deeper terror. Federal investigators meant this was bigger than just Bobby Ashford. It meant there were other powerful men involved, other crimes to be uncovered. It meant Vinny's careful anonymity was about to become very public. What do you need from me? The question came out flat, defeated. I need you to call Bobby. Tell him you want to meet. Tell him the kid spooked you and you're ready to make a deal. Marcus was already moving, pulling recording equipment from a suitcase Vinny hadn't noticed before. We need him to confess, Vinny. We need him to admit what he did to Sarah, to my father, to all those girls. He'll never confess. Bobby's too smart for that. He will if he thinks you're about to expose him anyway. If he believes his only choice is to kill you or convince you to stay quiet. Marcus's eyes were hard again, focused with the intensity of someone who'd spent 15 years preparing for this moment. Bobby Ashford is a narcissist. He won't be able to resist explaining how clever he's been, how perfectly he played everyone. Vinny's phone buzzed again. Another photo of Elena, this one taken from much closer. Close enough to see the small scar on her chin from when she'd fallen off her bike last summer. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It had been made 15 years ago when Vinny decided to believe a convenient lie rather than face an inconvenient truth. Now Bobby Ashford was threatening the only pure thing left in Vinny's world, and silence was no longer an option. Set up the recorder, Vinny said, reaching for his phone. Let's end this. Vinny's hands trembled as he dialed Bobby's number, the weight of 15 years pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. Marcus had positioned the recording equipment carefully. Tiny microphones clipped to Vinny's collar, a backup device hidden in his jacket pocket. The hotel room felt like a stage set, all harsh lighting and exposed truths. The phone rang twice before Bobby's familiar voice answered, warm and casual as if they were still the same friends who'd built empires together. Vinny, my old partner. I was wondering when you'd call. We need to talk. Vinny kept his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest, face to face. Of course we do. The young Reed boy has been quite persistent, hasn't he? Just like his father. There was amusement in Bobby's tone, the confidence of a man who'd been playing this game for decades. I assume you've seen his little research project by now. The Biltmore, presidential suite, 1 hour. How dramatic. But then you always did love your grand gestures. Bobby's laugh was the same one Vinny had heard 1,000 times over business lunches and late-night strategy sessions. Don't worry about the boy, Vincent. This will all be over soon. The line went dead. Vinny stared at the phone, seeing Bobby's face in his memory, not as the monster Marcus had revealed, but as the mentor who'd guided his career, the friend who'd attended Derek's graduation, the man who'd helped him bury his deepest shame. He'll come, Vinny said. Bobby never could resist a confrontation. Marcus was checking the recording equipment one final time, his movements precise and practiced. Remember, we need him to admit to Sarah's murder specifically. Everything else is circumstantial without his confession. What if he just kills me? He won't. Not in his own hotel, not when he knows federal agents are watching. Marcus met Vinny's eyes. But he'll try to convince you to disappear. New identity, offshore accounts, a comfortable exile somewhere without extradition treaties. That's his pattern. He eliminates problems by offering them golden cages. Vinny thought about Elena, about the photos Bobby had sent, about the casual cruelty in those messages. And if I refuse, then we'll find out how desperate Bobby Ashford really is. The Biltmore's presidential suite occupied the entire top floor, a monument to old Hollywood excess with crystal chandeliers and windows that offered commanding views of downtown Los Angeles. Bobby was waiting when Vinny arrived, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked exactly as he had 15 years ago. Silver-haired, commanding, radiating the quiet confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for anything. "Vincent," Bobby said, embracing him like a beloved brother, "you look terrible. This whole mess with the Reed boy has really gotten to you, hasn't it?" "Cut the shit, Bobby. I know what you did." Bobby's smile never wavered as he moved to the suite's bar, pouring 2 glasses of scotch with practiced ease. "I've done a lot of things, old friend. You'll need to be more specific. Sarah Chen. You killed her." "Did I?" Bobby handed him the scotch, his expression mildly curious. "That's quite an accusation. I thought we'd established that your son was responsible for that unfortunate incident." The casual dismissal of Derek's 15 years of suffering ignited something primal in Vinny's chest. "Derek was unconscious. You drugged him, positioned him at the crime scene, then called me to clean up your mess." "My mess?" Bobby's laugh was genuinely delighted. "Vincent, you're giving me far too much credit, though I must admit the plan was rather elegant in its simplicity." Vinny felt the recording device against his chest, a small weight that carried the promise of justice. "Tell me about the other girls. Tell me about the network you've been running." Bobby's expression shifted slightly, the mask of friendly concern slipping to reveal something predatory underneath. "Ah, so the Reed boy has been thorough. I wondered how much he'd actually uncovered." He moved to the windows, gazing out at the city spread below. "Do you want to know the beautiful irony, Vincent? Sarah Chen came to me first. Before she went to anyone else with her little investigation, she approached me directly, thinking I might be an ally. And you killed her for it." "I offered her a job," Bobby corrected. "Generous salary, excellent benefits, all the access she could want to write puff pieces about premiere parties and award shows. She could have had a comfortable life in this industry." His voice hardened. Instead, she chose to be self-righteous, to dig where she wasn't wanted, to threaten something much larger than herself. "So you murdered her and framed an innocent man." Bobby turned back to him, and for the first time in their long friendship, Vinny saw him completely unmasked, cold, calculating, utterly without remorse. "I solved a problem, Vincent, just like I've been solving problems for 20 years. Just like I solved your problem that night when you called me, panicked and desperate, begging me to save your worthless son." The admission hung in the air between them, clear and damning. Vinny thought about Marcus, about the federal agents who would soon hear these words, about the families of 17 dead women who might finally get justice. "And now?" Vinny asked. Bobby smiled, and it was the expression of a predator who'd never lost a hunt. "Now you're going to disappear, old friend, before this gets any more complicated than it needs to be." The silence that followed Bobby's threat stretched like a held breath. Vinny could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the recording device against his chest like a talisman. 15 years of complicity were about to end in this room, one way or another. "You think I'm just going to vanish because you tell me to?" Vinny kept his voice steady, though his hands trembled around the scotch glass. "Leave my granddaughter, abandon everything, so you can keep killing?" Bobby's smile widened, and Vinny saw genuine pleasure in his old friend's eyes. "Oh, Vincent, you still don't understand how this works, do you? You think this is about choice?" He gestured toward the windows, toward the city sprawling below. "I own half the judges in this town. I have compromising material on 3 Supreme Court justices. The Attorney General's daughter works for one of my subsidiary companies." His laugh was soft, almost fond. "The beautiful thing about corruption, Vincent, is that it's self-perpetuating. Once you're in, you're family, and family protects each other. The FBI will find themselves reassigned to domestic terrorism cases in Minnesota." Bobby's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. The task force investigating me will discover that their funding has been mysteriously redirected. Evidence will disappear. Witnesses will recant. He paused, swirling his scotch. Or they'll have accidents, car crashes, suicides. You'd be amazed how many federal agents struggle with depression. The casual mention of murdering law enforcement officers hit Vinny like a physical blow. This wasn't just about covering up past crimes anymore. Bobby was describing an entire shadow system, a parallel government built on fear and silence. What about Marcus? What about the recording equipment he's wearing? The evidence he's gathered? Bobby's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, quickly masked. Ah, so the boy told you about the wires. He set down his glass and moved to the suite's antique desk, opening a leather portfolio. Do you want to see something interesting, Vincent? The photographs Bobby spread across the desk were surveillance shots. Marcus entering the hotel, Marcus meeting with federal agents, Marcus installing recording equipment in the room downstairs. But there were others too. Marcus as a child, attending his father's funeral. Marcus in college, studying journalism. Marcus working as a fact-checker for a small magazine in Portland years before he'd ever approached Vinny with his script. I've been watching Thomas Reed's son for 8 years, Bobby said conversationally, ever since he started asking questions about his father's case. Did you really think I'd let him get this close without having contingencies in place? Vinny's blood turned to ice. What did you do? Nothing yet. But the beauty of having resources, Vincent, is that you can always create new narratives. Bobby pulled out another photograph, this one showing Marcus shaking hands with a man Vinny didn't recognize. This is Alexei Volkov, a known arms dealer with ties to several terrorist organizations. According to the metadata on this photo, Marcus Reed has been meeting with him for months, planning an attack on the federal building downtown. Bobby's smile was genuinely warm now, the expression of a teacher proud of his student's progress. Of course, the photo was completely fabricated. But by the time anyone figures that out, young Marcus will have suffered a tragic accident while attempting to flee the country. The scope of Bobby's planning was breathtaking in its cruelty. Not content with framing Marcus for terrorism, he'd built an entire false narrative that would destroy any credibility the young man might have, would make his evidence seem like the desperate lies of a would-be domestic terrorist. You're insane, Vinny whispered. I'm thorough. Bobby began gathering the photographs, his movements precise and unhurried. Which brings us back to your situation, old friend. You can disappear quietly. I have a lovely villa in Costa Rica, excellent security, all the amenities you could want. Or you can stay here and watch everything you care about burn. He paused, meeting Vinny's eyes, starting with Elena. The mention of his granddaughter's name broke something fundamental inside Vinny's chest. All the guilt, all the years of silence, all the careful compromises he'd made to preserve his comfortable life, none of it mattered now. Bobby Ashford was a cancer that had metastasized throughout the entire system, and the only way to stop him was to cut him out completely. You know what the difference is between you and me, Bobby? Vinny stood slowly, feeling older than his 62 years but somehow cleaner than he'd felt in 15 years. You think everyone is as much of a coward as I was. Bobby's expression shifted slightly, wariness creeping into his predator's smile. Meaning? Meaning I'm done being afraid. Vinny reached into his jacket, not for the recording device Bobby knew about, but for the backup transmitter Marcus had insisted on, the one connected directly to a federal task force that had been listening to every word of this conversation. And meaning you just confessed to multiple murders in front of people who aren't for sale. The suite's doors burst open simultaneously, federal agents flowing into the room with weapons drawn. Bobby Ashford, for the first time in 20 years, looked genuinely surprised. But even as they placed him in handcuffs, even as they read him his rights, Bobby's eyes never left Vinny's face, and his smile never completely disappeared. This isn't over, Vincent, he said softly. You have no idea how deep this goes. 6 months later, Vinny sat in his new office, smaller than the old one, cleaner somehow, reading the morning papers. The headline was simple: Hollywood producer convicted on 17 counts of murder. Below it, a smaller story: journalist's father exonerated in 15-year-old case. Thomas Reed's name had been officially cleared. Derek was out of rehab, speaking publicly for the first time about his false memories and the trauma of believing himself a killer. Marcus had published a book about the investigation, donating all proceeds to a foundation supporting families of trafficking victims. Vinny's testimony had been crucial in convicting not just Bobby Ashford, but 6 other men in his network. The cost had been enormous: his remaining industry connections, his reputation, most of his wealth. But Elena still called him every Sunday, and Derek had visited twice, and for the first time in 15 years, Vinny slept through the night without dreaming of blood. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Castellano? There's a young filmmaker here to see you. Says he has a script he thinks you'd be interested in." Vinny smiled, feeling something he'd forgotten existed: hope. "Send him in." Outside his window, Los Angeles stretched toward the horizon, still corrupt, still dangerous, still full of people willing to trade their souls for success. But it was also full of people like Marcus Reed, like Sarah Chen, like his own granddaughter. People who believed that truth mattered more than comfort, that justice was worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible. It wasn't redemption exactly. Some things couldn't be undone, some harm couldn't be repaired, but it was a beginning, a chance to spend whatever time he had left building something instead of burying it. And in a city built on illusions, that felt like the most honest ending he could ask for